want to thank everybody for your patience, trying to get the budget session done and get ready to come into this meeting. So thank you for waiting, and I'm going to call the meeting to order and let the record reflect that all board members are present. And please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Are there any modifications to the agenda from the board members? Seeing none, we'll move on to my report, which will be brief. I thought we could start using this time not only for me to give a report, but I'm also going to start asking for just a report from other board members if you've been out in the community representing the board or at school functions. And I think as we gear up for next school year, that after our retreat this summer, I think we'll talk a little bit more about being out in the schools on a regular basis. But I was able to attend Bailey's closing ceremony, not the graduation, but the celebration of the closing of Bailey. And that was a great event. Talked to some really amazing young people who have gone on to do some great things after graduating from Bailey. So that was the end of April, I believe. And then I went to McGregor's 10th anniversary celebration, which was great. I realized that I'd been on the board that long. I think I went to the ribbon cutting. So had a neat opportunity to talk to some young people who had their entries entered in the LAD fair, and was really moved to tears by a third grader who read me this amazing poem that she had written, which was really fantastic. But again, makes you realize just the variety of children that we serve, and a community that really supports such a wide diversity of students there, and so that was great. And I know a lot of you were able to attend graduations and represent the board there, and unfortunately I was sick that night for Kickapoos. And then I've also been in the community meeting with the Boys and Girls Club, and then also the community report card, which is coming to a close. I think it will be our 5th community report card that designates the blue ribbons and the red flags in our community. So that's what I've been up to. I don't know if anybody else had the chance to go to any end of year school events or.
I didn't go to a couple of end of school events, but I did visit the WUF school.
Oh, great.
A couple of weeks ago, and Pat gave me a wonderful tour. I was very impressed with what they're doing there. And I also was able to go to a special event at Middle College.
Oh, great.
I was part of a panel, and they really asked very hard questions. Just be careful if you go over there. You're going to be put to the test. I was very impressed with the faculty there and the faculty at the WUF school and the things that they're doing in both of those venues.
Great. I think anytime we can be out there and take advantage of those invitations, it's a great opportunity for us to represent the board and represent the system. So with that said, Dr. Ritter, your superintendent's report.
Just a couple things. Bailey's graduation. They celebrated their last graduation in un-air conditioned or non-air conditioned building. And so they're projecting and celebrating their next graduation will have air conditioning. So anyway, they did that. Then also, Middle College had 52 graduates, and the main speaker, she really was sharp and really grew a lot in Middle College and is going to UMKC. She had no intention to go to college. In fact, she did not want to graduate, and she's going to go to UMKC and she's wants to be an elementary teacher in Kansas City. And I approached her afterwards and said that city doesn't exist. And so anyway, but she's really very
wanting her to stay here, right?
Yes, exactly. So anyway, we had that. The close of school went very, very well. And for your information, that's the earliest Springfield, help me if I think it is, the earliest Springfield Public Schools has ever dismissed. And I told the kids, the students, that basically that's because we didn't have any snow days to speak of, that many snow days to speak of. And so that they can remember that in the future. But anyway, the staff were surprised by it, but I do think it's been a good thing for our families and for our children to get kind of out in front of the other schools as far as work and things like that. So that's been a good thing too. So anyway, summer school is rolling out, and we have staff hired for that, and we're going forward, and that's going to be over before we know it as well. So anyway, that's my report.
I meant to open the meeting just with a recognition of the loss of lives in Moore, Oklahoma, and I think for those of us who really dedicate our lives to young people and to education, to know that some of those victims died in a school was very even more disturbing. So just our thoughts, our prayers, and our hope for a better future for that community is certainly there. So I meant to mention that. Mrs. Luton, are there any public comments? She's not there.
Trying to get my password.
Oh, she's trying to get your password. Is anybody here to speak on agenda items? Okay. All right, then we'll go to information items. Dr. Ritter, the internal audit report.
Yes, Mr. Mueller is here to share kind of like a quarterly report, an update for that, for the board and for the community.
Yes, good evening. I'm here tonight to present the internal audit report of the Board of Education, Superintendent, and Cabinet expenditure accounts. You've all received the full written report through board docs, and at the May 7th executive session, I also went over the findings with you. So tonight, I'm just going to hit on the highlights of the findings. But first, I would like to talk a little bit about the scope and methodology of this audit so you know what I looked at. I did limit my audit to looking at the expenditures for these areas. So what that means is all these expenditures were administrative level expenditures. There weren't any school level or instructional expenditures looked at here. I also limited my examination to only invoices and other expenditures that occurred in the first 6 months of the year. So anything that happened from July 1 through December 31st. Examples of some of the things I looked at, some of the documents were payroll contracts, invoices, purchase orders, journal entries, that kind of thing. Travel reimbursements was something else I looked at. The objective of my audit had 4 parts. First, I was looking to see if the expenditures were for appropriate district purposes. I also was looking to see if the expenditures complied with district purchasing and accounting policies and procedures. I also looked to see if the expenditures were recorded in proper general ledger accounts. And specifically for payroll expenditures, I looked to see if payroll was being paid in accordance with contracts. Before I move on to the 3 findings, there was one other thing I wanted to point out that's probably equally as important, is when I was looking at the expenditures, I found no instances where there were any inappropriate expenditures. So I think that's important to note up front before I jump into my findings, because I think that is equally as important. The first finding I had to do with when I was looking at Dr. Ritter's employment contracts. What I noticed was there was some language that wasn't quite clear, and basically in a nutshell, my recommendation is that legal counsel and HR and management need to take a look at that language and clarify that, just so that there's no misunderstandings and to prevent any kind of misinterpretations in the future. The second finding, this finding has to do with purchase order noncompliance. The district has the Administrative Practices and Procedures Manual, and in this manual, it's very definitive. It requires that before entering into any agreements, contracts, or arrangements that obligate the district to pay a sum of money, $1,000 or greater, a properly executed purchase order must be issued by the purchasing department. And the key there is that the purchase order should come before the obligation. And when I was looking at expenditures, I noted several instances where purchase orders were issued after the obligation had been made. So my recommendation here is for management to take a look at this and see either enforce the procedures, find a way to better enforce these, or if there's a reason why the policies and procedures need to change, if there are valid exceptions to the rule, document those and document some kind of approval process for these exceptions. And the final finding, when I was looking at the expenditures to see if they complied with policies and procedures, I ran into a little bit of difficulty because when I was looking at board policies, there were some inconsistencies there with what was in the Administrative Practices and Procedures Manual. And that manual that I referenced, that's designed to implement board policy. And what has happened over the years is that manual has been updated to reflect current procedures, but sometimes the board policies don't get updated to reflect this. Really my recommendation there is pretty simple too, that management needs to take a look at both of these documents and make sure they're in alignment. I'll be happy to answer your questions. I do want to first thank everyone who helped me with this audit, who pulled documents and answered my questions. As always, I can never do an audit without help from others at the district. So I will answer your questions.
Are there questions, Mr.? Yeah.
But just an information point, and I think you brought this up very well when you presented this to us, is an example, say, of a purchase order of an expense that didn't have a purchase order, was if the superintendent buys an airline ticket to go to the National School Board meeting, then he submits his reimbursement. So it's not really a nefarious intent, but the board needs to change our policy on expenses of that nature when we're reimbursing someone for travel or something like that. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's a good example. I think what you're referring to, there was a situation where 4 individuals, including Dr. Ritter, were going to a conference out of state. And so the process was to go online and purchase the airline tickets. Well, for 4 people, that obviously the airline prices, the total was over $1,000. And so what happens whenever you click submit or click OK on that website, the purchase has been made, the obligation has been made. And so there was really no way that I know of, maybe there is, but of getting a purchase order in advance when you might not even know which airline you're going to use, what the exact dollar amount would be. So that's what I was getting at in my recommendation, where if there are valid exceptions to the rule, then a process should be in place to address that.
Makes sense.
Mr. Hosmer?
I guess that I'm a little confused as to the management response to this. In your report says that the management agrees it's a concern. We're going to send out information telling people you got to follow the procedures, and we're going to develop disciplinary procedures for those who continue to violate the policy. But it sounds like from what Dr. Prater was saying and what you kind of talked to us about previously, that maybe the better response is more of a two-pronged response, which is change policies that need to be changed in the situation that you just described. And then, I'm assuming some of these are things really they should have had a purchase order, period. Is that accurate?
There were a couple instances like that, but there were others that seemed like valid exceptions to the rule.
And you talk about, even though it's not an intentional act of somebody trying to violate a policy, it is kind of puts us in a tough situation when we have a policy and it's being continuously violated. Either, like you said, we need to change the policy or find a better way of enforcing that policy. So I'm a little confused as to management's response on that issue.
I didn't know if maybe Steve would like to address the management's response portion, since that's really not my response.
I agree with Mr. Hosmer.
Well, there you go.
Just get up and leave.
What else do you want to say?
You can sit up and take a bow.
Add something else. When does that ever happen, Andy? It's like June 20th.
And I think the other thing we discussed is also that $1,000 limit may need to be looked at as well. Didn't you say that policy is like,
That's something to consider. The last time that was increased, I think, was about 10 years ago. I don't know the exact date, but I think it was increased from 500 to 1,000, and then it hasn't increased since then.
Yeah.
And just with inflation alone, it would be up to about probably 1,200, 1,300 by now, I would think. So
Okay.
something else to consider.
but again, you didn't find any inappropriate use of funds or
No, and
travel
especially
reimbursement that shouldn't have been reimbursed or anything?
No, and one of the things I was going to mention that I didn't earlier was when I was looking at travel reimbursements, I was looking at the mileage that was requested, and I even looked to see if that was the actual mileage. I went on Google Maps and I looked and
Good for
and
you.
I looked to see if people were requesting what they should, and they did, and I looked to see if there was proper approvals by supervisors, and there were. Like with Dr. Ritter's travel and reimbursements, I saw where the board president signed off on those. So, again, I found no instances of inappropriate expenditures there.
Any other questions from the board? We appreciate that. I think that was one thing that when we brought on an internal auditor, we wanted to start, with our own expenses and Dr. Ritter's, and I know you've done some work before that because there were some more pressing issues, but I think that this sets a good tone in moving forward, and I'm glad you're getting the kind of cooperation that you need from other staff, and I think this is, at least from my perspective, exactly why we have you in the position that we do. So, okay.
I just want to make one point that Mr. Mueller is an internal auditor, and we need to treat him that way, and we got to be careful we don't bring him into administrative processes, and he's involved in the process, and he eventually has to audit that process, and that's a problem. So we have to make sure it stays very, very pure. So, okay?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ritter, moving on to our OSRs, our ongoing systems review.
There we go. Ongoing systems review. Dr. Goodman? How many more meetings, sir?
This could be it.
This is your last meeting?
No, he said could be it.
Could be.
Oh,
I serve at the discretion of the administration.
you're not leaving. Well, before you start, thank you for getting us to this point, Dr. Goodman.
My pleasure. This evening, for the May Ongoing Systems Review compilation, we have 6 programs to be brought forward, including English language learners, information literacy, transportation, educational services, educational operations, and finance. And as has been customary, throughout the process we'll gather feedback about the product itself, and then we will also have a brief discussion around the Board of Education Ongoing Systems Review as a follow-up from the April session. We have had some discussions along that. So at this time I will ask Mrs. Rhonda Hittenberg-Ortiz to join me for the English Language Learners Ongoing Systems Review.
That's right.
Are there any questions related to this review? Go ahead, Andy.
Quick question. One of your key opportunities for improvements talks about reducing the scenario of parents declining transfers to ELL site schools. Is that the idea that they don't want to leave their boundary school and to go to a school where services are offered?
Correct.
Is that the
Scenario meaning that the scenario just means that that's the model that we have in place right now. So our declined parents are not necessarily declining services, they're declining a transfer. Mm-hmm.
So, and the idea, as you put here, is to have professionals at all school, which I'm assuming has a cost to it, and that's is that reflected in the next steps, or is that just something in the future?
Yeah, number one would be that cost is for the 3 additional teachers. To have an ELL professional at each site would require a lot more than 3 because we have 9 teachers right now.
Any more questions? Sorry, I'm a little
I do.
distracted here. Go ahead.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry,
It's not you.
My night, it's technology. Just a procedural thing, this is fairly new to me. When you, in the red, the yes, 236, that's how much it would cost the yes means,
Okay.
So this was a process improvement after the first round of if there are opportunities for improvement that carry a financial implication, we are to indicate yes, thus the yes, and then the value as well. So yes meaning yes, this carries a financial implication.
oh, just not that yes.
That's right.
She's going to get money for this.
No.
Correct.
You know, that could be interpreted another way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is probably in here, but can you tell us how many students you serve?
At this time, which was April, we served 840. Today I checked, we serve 870.
And
Wow.
how many languages?
42.
42?
42.
And how many potentially are there? You know, you're saying you're serving that many, but how many are there really in the system?
This is one of the things that are in your notes, but there are probably at least 1,000 or 1,200 that have potentially not been identified yet.
Over the 800 or 700?
No, total.
Total, okay.
And of the 800 that you serve, what is the percentage that the home language is Spanish?
43%. I looked that up today.
Wow. There's a lot of other languages in that 60%.
Yes. There are 6
50.
languages spoken by 80% of our kids. Spanish, Vietnamese is second, Russian, Burmese and Chinese, and then Romanian. Those are our top 6.
And then there's 36 more.
And then there's many, many more.
Wow. Any other questions about this review? Thank you.
Next will be Dr. Robin Hagerman with Information Literacy.
Questions on this one? Gotta be.
No, I'm just pleased with the list of things that you're trying to do, and the information literacy piece is, of course, crucial. So I was pleased to see what your priorities are and how you're following through on those.
I have one question on the goal to improve student satisfaction with the services provided, and I noticed that a couple of your percentages were a little, they're in the red range. And this is from a student survey, and this was a student's response. Is that all grade levels, or is that just kind of a general K-12 survey, or?
We have different surveys for primary, intermediate, middle school, and high school that try to get at the same information, but in kid-friendly terms that are appropriate for that age bracket, if that makes sense. So I think you lose a little bit of reliability when you try to do that, but it also allows us to get at least some information from those early readers also.
So, for example, the 55.4%, say the library makes me want to read more. Is that different if you looked at just K-5 or middle school or high school?
It is slightly different, but not as different as you might think. It's a pretty sound average that we're looking at there. I think elementary typically is a little higher, but it's not significantly higher in this case.
Have you drilled down on that number in terms of kind of figuring out why?
On August 1st, that is our key work, is to look at those student surveys. That's our first day back together as a K-12 group. And we're going to dig into those student survey questions and try to revision our goals for 13-14 totally centered around the student perception of the library.
You may also want to mention the project that your librarians have with the nooks and the e-readers.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. This spring we did a full day of an inquiry-based professional learning session on the digital reading continuum. and each librarian set a strategy for their library for how to begin to approach or continue their current approach on digital reading. And we really think that when students, this is our hypothesis, so August 1st we'll drill down and see for sure, but our hypothesis is that the kids are reading differently. We're seeing schools, even with fairly high free and reduced lunch rates, whose students are saying, we have e-readers at home. And so we're just not matching that yet. And so when they think about reading on a device and they come to our library and they read a book, even if it's a new book, they're just not feeling that connection to the library that we would want them to feel.
Different.
I think
Anything else?
they're not afraid of nooks.
Okay, thank you.
Good stuff.
Next will be Mr. Rick Emling with Transportation.
Are there any questions about the transportation OSR? Yeah, go ahead. Jim.
And that was on your KSM summary with the annual inspection rates, where we say passing the first time is 95.9. And it says against the state average. What is the state average?
Yeah, against the state, actually the state average is about 88.
Okay, that's what I
Wow.
assumed we were.
And we continue to achieve a higher level than that. And the state gives out awards for fleet excellence awards for anything over 90%. And that's first time pass through. So you've got to be 100%. You can't just bring it around, fix it, and pull it in again. It ends it on first time through. And they descend on us for about 4 days every year to do that.
Yes, can you provide just a little more information about under safety, or Goal 1, Safety 1, and you have a number of preventable accidents. Can you identify preventable accidents?
Absolutely, we can. We do a full investigation on every accident we have, and the short answer is, under my leadership, it's very difficult to have a non-preventable accident. Basically, non-preventable means you weren't moving and something hit you. The defensive driving that we do now and all the training the drivers go through, we teach them to anticipate, to get the big picture, things like that. So very difficult to have one. Now, one of them was when we had some ice and some freezing frost, we slid down a hill and hit a mailbox. Yeah, I can't really hang that one on the driver, but so those are preventables, and we feel very good about that. If you look at national averages for accidents, it's about, and there's varying statistics out there. You have to weed through it. The NTSB does all accidents, and I focus on preventable. It comes out, it's about 20 preventable accidents per million miles. We run about 1.9 million.
Wow.
So we're doing very well. So at this point, we're gauging our success on our own numbers, and we want to continue driving that down. You'll see that's also in a place for improvement, because it's always got to be something. If I've got 115 drivers that go accident-free for a whole year, why can't they all? So that's
Is that because the drivers in Springfield are very good?
His drivers are.
No, I meant regular
If you
drivers.
look at, I think that, yes, we've got a lot of very good drivers. I've got drivers that are retired truck drivers that are now at 3 million miles
That's
accident-free, folks. So yes, in that. But if you look 3 years ago, we had 65 preventable accidents.
Wow.
That's not what I meant. I meant
first year
other
I was here.
drivers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I meant the other drivers.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's a
Kenny.
safer place? I don't know about that.
Could I just ask, I realize how old the buses are. What kind of maintenance costs? I don't see. I mean, that's costing us some money for those older vehicles. Is
Part
that?
of the reason, when you get up over that 15-year, those buses that you're maintaining beyond that are more costly to maintain, obviously. When you get up over that 20-year, you simply you can't buy parts. They don't make them anymore. We lost a bus last year for a brake spindle, which is a $20 part, but the bus was 24 years old.
Wow.
That bus is history. You
3D printing's going to take care
You
of
can't
that.
go to the junkyard and pull a brake spindle off and put it on a bus. That'd be against the law. So, you have to buy, for school buses, you have to buy new manufacturer recommended parts.
Oh.
There are some manufacturer, there are some aftermarket, but you can't put a used part on a bus.
Oh.
So has your maintenance budget been going up every year as these are aging? I mean, I assume, but we haven't seen those numbers. But
I'm going to say that it's gone up a little, but not very much. Mrs. Bush, we haven't met yet. This is my third year here. We've implemented preventive maintenance practices and trying to get into predictive maintenance now, which is where the industry is going, to try to keep those costs down. But when you get up those 15-plus-year-old buses, it gets very difficult, and really to maintain the service we want to. The other thing is those buses, the technology in school buses has come along that the newer buses are safer because they've put more into those buses for safety reasons, so you don't have the same compartmentalization and things like that to protect the children in some of those older buses. So that's also a factor.
Right. Thanks.
Mr. Renner.
Yeah, I'm amazed at what I've been here a long time, and that predictably 3/4 to 100% of my phone calls at the beginning of school were about transportation. Used to be. I get none. Zero. So I've been there where it was just huge issues, and I know any kind of bus accident is news, but when I know the millions of miles we drive and we don't have any, you and your drivers, to me it's just like the teacher. I wouldn't drive a bus. There'd be no way. I've done every job in the school system, but I would except drive a bus, and to me it would be like teaching with your class all behind you all the time, and then all these other distractions. I just think they do a fantastic job, and I think we're doing an excellent job of being on time, picking up our children, and you're saying more riding, and I think that's because of the job that you're doing and what's happening on the buses, or what is not happening on the buses, that would mean that children would not want to ride, or parents wouldn't want them on there. So I just want to compliment you on this program, because it's essential that we have a good transportation program, and ours is just excellent.
Quick question. Talk to me a little bit about, you said you talked about that you've done increased passenger management training, which has reduced the student conduct tickets. I'm assuming these are tickets given to students that act up on the bus.
Correct.
And that those numbers are down as a result of that training. I think that's a real important thing to be looking at. But talk a little bit about what you've done to try to increase that management.
Well, there are. It's been a focus this year, starting this year. Coming in, I had to look at the big picture, focus on reducing accidents, being safety, being on time, being efficient, not adding routes, even though we're adding kids, and how can we do that? And we've been able to do that. So this year was really the first year we wanted to implement more, and we, in the industry, it's called passenger management. I like to call it customer service, because not only do we need to know how to manage our students on the bus, we need to know how to talk to a principal about a problem. I'm talking about a bus driver talking to a principal or whoever, so it really is a customer service. So there are a lot of programs out there that deal with passenger management. You can go online. There's various services. We have people come in and speak. We have monthly safety meetings. We spend an entire, literally almost half of our in-service day, our Genesis day, talking about customer service and how to improve it. And so we have various programs. And it really comes down to a focus and an awareness. You can teach people a lot of things. There's only so much retention. So you've got to then follow that up with continued, hey, we need to treat these kids right and with respect. And, when you have cameras on every bus, there's no guessing game. If we're not doing the right things, we're not managing our passengers, we're going to know about it. And then we can take that individual and correct them on a one-on-one basis so that we know. We also do road evaluations where every driver at least once a year, if not twice, has someone ride with them, and we do a full-blown evaluation. And it's not just driving skills, it's passenger management as well. And so we'll continue to focus on that. Part of what we want to get to is, we need to deliver students on time, but also ready to learn. We heard from teachers about disruption. If I'm on time, the kids are in class on time. If there's a fight on the bus, that group of kids, they're not ready to learn when they get to school. They're still remembering the fight on the bus. So to the extent I can provide a ride that is more customer service friendly and better organized, then we'll achieve some of that goal.
And it's important because you go to the high-performing schools, and they understand that the custodian, the food service person, the school secretary are as important as the teachers in making engaged students. And I think bus drivers, they're the first ones to see the kids and the last ones to see the kids, and they can have a lot to say about how engaged kids are when they get to school and how excited they are and how welcome they feel when they get on the bus and when they get off the bus. So I think it really is just getting them to school. I know is a big thing, getting them there safe and all these other things that your bus drivers do. But that other component, boy, it's equally important, I think, and rewarding if we can start kids off, as soon as they get on that bus with somebody that's welcoming and has their best interests at heart.
Good morning, Johnny. Please have a seat, as opposed to shut up and sit down.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saying that to Cabinet. Anyway,
Hey, I would like to reiterate what Mr. Renner said. I mean, since I've been on the board every year, I mean, seriously, those are the phone calls you get. It's about transportation, bus stops, late, don't like this route, da-da-da-da. And really, I have not had those in the last few years. So, that's where we need to be solving our problems is, and I appreciate the work that you do.
The reasons for that, it's a lot of process change we've gone through since I've been here. It's really, and Dr. Ritter and I have talked about this, it's an overall customer service attitude that we have to have. The community is a customer, and we have to treat them like that. We have to solve their problems and follow up with them. And a lot of times I would imagine you all get a phone call because they called us first and we didn't solve their problem or never got back to them. You have to follow up and you have to try to solve the problem.
And that may be why more kids are riding the bus, too. So
I was just going to say
thank you.
that, yes.
All right, we'll go on to educational services. Thanks a lot.
Mrs. Moore.
Good evening. What questions can I answer for you?
Mrs. Bush is just getting to her computer here.
Finally, thank you for your patience.
Any questions here?
My question's kind of a general one, and as we look at trying to focus what we're trying to do and set goals next year, whatever that is. As everybody knows, my concerns are early childhood education and reading by third grade, reading at grade level. Can we have some kind of discussion at some point about those numbers, looking at MSIP numbers, looking at MAP numbers, trying to understand what they mean and what the strategies are that you all have found that are successful?
Absolutely. First of all, what I would say is kudos to quality improvement and accountability, because they've pulled together some comprehensive data about what the system looks like K-12 by grade level with both literacy and math. And so what we've seen in our curriculum ongoing systems review is that there is a segment of our population, and it exists in every single one of our schools, and there is a group of students that moves through at every grade level and has not yet been able to read at grade level. And so I value your opinion about that every child reading at third grade, and you and I have had that conversation. Waiting till third grade is too late. There are measures of readiness at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and we've got to be aware of intervening early on. And so the other piece of the opportunity for improvement that we're bringing forward from Ed Services is a model of really now being able, we know that that data exists, what do we do with it? And to use a medical analogy, when you go to the doctor, if you do a strep test, they say, here's what the problem is, we'd like you to try this, want you to do it with fidelity or with the prescription as it's written for X number of weeks, then we're going to check back in. If it worked, fine. If it didn't, you get another course of medicine. And we need to see that same diagnosis, prescription, treatment, and monitoring approach in classrooms, in grade levels, in schools, and we have parts and pieces of that everywhere. We just need to be more systematic across the district at doing that. And I think that where the district is with their appetite and their desire to use data, we're poised to do that. I think the other thing that is also going to happen is that as we get deeper into those Missouri learning standards, what we're finding is that we get with literacy that there are foundational, you can't decode, you can't comprehend. There's that same problem with numeracy. If you don't get conceptual understanding of mathematics, you can't do algebraic equations. And so really building good fluency with numeracy, 0 to 5, 0 to 10, early on is going to shore up the core. And so that's really the work that our division will be working on, and in concert with secondary and elementary operations, because it's really got to be that consistent approach across the district. And so that's where we're headed.
It's been interesting to me that since I first talked about running for the school board, things have come out about dyslexia. And once you hear one thing, suddenly you hear other people. So many people have, if not a child with a problem, somebody else with a problem. So, of course, that's one of my hot buttons right now, too, because there's the appearance, at least, that they're falling through the cracks, those dyslexic students. And so one of my commitments is to find out more about that. And so I'm curious about what kind of barriers are there to reading, and is there a solution for everybody? Is there not one? I guess I want to learn more about literacy and the challenges. I don't want you to do that now.
Okay.
But I think if that's our focus, and I know you can talk about, but it seems to me that ought to be our focus. And if it is, then what works and what do you need in order to make those changes that make as many kids as can be successful.
And what I would say is that those were kind of the marching orders that I've gotten from Dr. Ritter, that literacy is job one. And I think the other piece is getting very familiar with the research and the data, because we don't want students to be over-identified for dyslexia any more than we want them under-identified. And you're usually looking at about 1 to 2% of the population that meets that true characteristic. There are also kind of other student needs that manifest in very similar ways and can be addressed by some of the early intervention processes. And that's, of course, the work that we've got to be about this year. You're absolutely right, and we're moving as quickly as we can to address those concerns.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Under effective use of resources, I think it's number 2, and then provide consistently high quality of support. And then you have a list of all departments, from athletics and activities through English language learners. Also, then you're at your year 1.
I think that's ed ops.
I think that's next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was
That's
like,
not you.
those are not sounding familiar to
Was
me.
I went ahead of you? That's okay, because I was going to ask, why are you looking at that?
And she's not. I'm not, was panicking a little bit.
Yeah. Very good. Okay.
Any other board members have questions of Mrs. Moore?
Well,
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
go back to the one that is yours. And this is the percent of opportunities for improvement resolved from each educational service. So you're doing this within your department, literacy, or curriculum, information literacy. Okay, and then you have year 1, and then your range. How are you planning to determine year 2 where you fit into those ranges? Will that be based on some data that you're collecting now, or?
Are you looking at goal 2, the
Yes.
seamless delivery of services?
Yes.
What we found is that across all of the ongoing systems reviews, the earlier ones, if you go back historically and look through all of them, the measures evolved over time. And one of the things we learned, because we're so closely related to Dr. Goodman, is that at each successive iteration, they got a little tighter. People listened to the board feedback. The rigor came up. Several of you spoke to the idea that, it's great to see green, but if it's all green, have you set the bar high enough? And so looking for that balance. And so what we observed across educational services is that there was variation across all of them, which spoke to 2 things. We didn't have in our division a consistent measure of what quality looked like. We had good things happening, but we had 5 to 6 different measures. We'd like to calibrate that more tightly and base it on what we've seen comprehensively across the ongoing system reviews, so that we're in range with everybody, so that when you look at those, a 95 means a 95 and it's not a 91 someplace else. So that for some of those, when we can have very consistent measures, that will increase your trust and faith in us, and you won't have to feel like a statistician to make some sense of the data that we're sharing with you.
That will be helpful. Anything else from the board on this? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next will be Educational Operations, Drs. Harrell and Hackenworth.
I believe Dr. Frederick has a question.
This is the only team that didn't ask for more money. For Mr. Hosmer's information, there were $1.7 million of requests in this month's report alone.
Questions here? Yeah, okay.
And my question dealt with the class size and the administrator-student ratio. Primarily, my question was the desirable standards and minimal standards. Is that ours or is that DESI's? That's DESI standards, okay. I didn't know if we had our own established or not, okay.
I'll try to get through our data here. Anybody else?
I'll respond on the year one question from Dr. Frederick, because actually Mrs. Moore did have one somewhat similar to it as well. This is kind of a placeholder in that these last two programs being brought forward are a little bit different than other programs you've seen in that they have a supervisory role of other programs that have gone through the ongoing systems review process. So what these year one measures indicate here is that they're going to take stock of what comes out of the full process now here that we've gone at the end, but they can't do it now because it's still essentially in process. And this is kind of that placeholder to say they will be monitoring these OFEs coming through to see what kind of resolution we get. So kind of a status check they've placed upon themselves for following up under these programs. And the reason they're all listed is because when we look at the scope of the work of these two individuals and the program they run, all of this is in scope.
So just to make sure that I understand this. So for example, with athletics and activities for year two, what we would see is if athletics and activities, the budget goes as requested and they meet one of their opportunities for improvement by additional assistance in that department. So we might expect year two to see some yellow or green.
Yeah, it would actually be it'd be 1% in my mind. I mean, I guess we have to, we'll see it when we do it, but, if they have 5 and they've resolved 2 of them, they've resolved 40% of their OPEs.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about class size also. Kindergarten through 4th, we have red. Okay, so that's like 40% of our classes in 4th grade are meeting desirable standards. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yes.
Will any of the staffing that is proposed in next year's budget deal with these numbers in terms of getting some of that? Because it seems like we're pretty good at the upper level. There's a lot less red and more yellow and green. But those lower grades, and again, what we're talking about, that focus on getting kids or children prepared.
It will, we were allocated, I think, 10 FTE at the elementary level for next year. So it will certainly impact what you see here in these measures. Now, as for specific grade levels, I couldn't tell you
That's fine.
How it will impact them by grade level. Although one of the challenges that we have and will have for the next couple of years is just space itself. So even if enrollment projections warrant additional FTE, there may be there are the times where I can't put a teacher in a building there's no space left. So I think after 15-16, we'll be able to make greater impact on that class size. But yeah, obviously the 10 FTE will help us there.
Mr. Lee?
One of your goals was the number of split classrooms, and I assume looks like your goal is 0 there.
Yeah.
And this is more comment than maybe question too. I'm not sure that's reasonable based the way our schools are. When
Right.
we've got schools with 1 classroom and 1 grade level, one class in the grade levels, things like that. I mean, I'm not questioning you're setting a goal for 0 because I think that would be a good goal, but I'm not sure that that's really realistic with the current
I don't disagree with you.
setup. I don't know what the right number is, but
Right.
I just
Well, I think, ideally the right number probably is 0, but it's very big picture. When we have neighborhood schools like we do, you get into a lot of issues of how could you ever come up with enough classrooms in one building where you could eliminate those, and then you get into the whole conversation of consolidation and those sorts of things. But
I just don't ever see that one going green.
it's
right
not
now.
going to be easy. And one of the reasons we placed that one on there, that was a past board goal, and so when we or MSEP 5 goal, so when we put this together and as we allocate our FTE each year, we do try to reduce that number as much as we can as we go through. So we did include it as a goal, but I agree with you. Getting a degree there would be difficult.
I think it's important to keep it in front of us, and we continue to see that and what the extent of that is. But I just
It's certainly a good number to monitor. And I will tell you, there are many examples of those combination classrooms that are really high functioning classrooms because of the way we group the students. So sometimes it's a nice setup as well.
I spent my first 7 years in elementary school in a split classroom.
Yeah.
And he
7
turned
out
out
of the
just
8
fine.
years.
Yeah.
And I survived.
So you're the positive.
Not very well, but I survived.
I had 4 classes.
Yeah.
So
Mr. Hasler, did you have a question?
One-room schoolhouse, Jerry?
homeschool.
First of
punchy
all, in
tonight.
response to Dr. Prater's comment, I would note that they're already getting about half of our budget. So the fact that they're not asking for money, I don't know that that's such a big deal since they're already getting half the budget. But Jerry, just his comment about the split classrooms piqued my interest a little bit. Do we have data on? Because I know in my kids' school we've had 2 or 3 split classrooms, and
Sure.
I know one had kind of the same experience, at least from parents, was that it was a pretty impressive classroom.
Right.
Do we have data on what the growth, now that we have performance series, what the growth is in a split classroom versus the growth in a regular classroom?
I don't know if we've looked at the data specifically for combination classrooms. Typically what we do is we look at 3rd grade data, 4th grade data. So we take that class of 10 3rd graders and 10 4th graders, and they're pulled in the opposite directions, but certainly think data we could gather.
I'd certainly like to see it because, again, I understand Jerry's. I like having neighborhood schools, and there are times when you got 25 4th graders and you got 2 4th grade teachers, and that just doesn't work out.
Exactly.
And it does not make sense for the rest of the school district to have to deal with that. But and I know kind of theoretically we don't want split classrooms, but I'd like to see the data behind whether or not there's an impact on achievement, because that's all we're here for, really, is our kids learning, and if they're learning, then
Right.
what's the
Gives
problem?
us another week with Matt.
Gives them a project.
We ran out of work for him, so we're going to.
Any other questions about this particular? There's a lot of information in here. It's hard to sort through.
Okay, finance.
Okay, thank you.
And finally will be Finance, and Mr. John Everest will join me at the podium.
Good evening.
Hello. Are there questions for Mr. Everest? Yeah, Dr. Prater.
Talk about the Affordable Care Act and the compliance regulation and what all that's involving.
We are kind of like every other company out there right now, trying to wrap our heads around what all that's going to entail. Since it initially came out, there had the first reporting requirements and different things that were going to be happening, and now those are getting pushed back. So we're kind of trying to get an idea of what the deadlines truly are going to be and define what that's going to mean for us. Every time we kind of figure out one answer, we find, okay, there's something else we're going to have to work on. So it's been one of those things where it's been a lot of work trying to keep up with it. Yeah.
Is the American Express for vendor bill pay, is that basically the same as the P card?
No, it's different. This will actually, the invoices will go through just like a normal invoice will. It'll actually go through the whole process just like a normal invoice, except at the very end, instead of cutting a check to pay that company, we would then call them and pay it by American Express. So you go through the normal process, but you're not issuing a check to them. You're actually paying that bill or that amount due with your American Express card.
Do we use P cards?
We do.
We have
And
P
we
cards?
use American Express for those.
Okay.
Our American Express rebate has actually went up quite a bit from the UMB rebate. We used to use UMB for our P cards, and American Express rebates went up quite a bit.
Do we have any pushback from vendors getting paid by American Express?
We haven't yet, but we're still very early. That's why we're on the process. We're still showing that as red. Each vendor is going to be a little different, and that's one of the things we've run into. Some of them will want, some of them refuse. Some of them will want to be contacted by phone to make that payment. Some of them are by email. So far, we've only ran into one that has said no, we will not take it, and that is because we actually have a contract with them, and we got better rates with them, knowing that they weren't going to have to receive that by.
Because I'm assuming American Express takes out a much higher percentage than another.
They are higher. Yeah, there's the thought process out there that they're significantly higher, and it kind of depends on the company and the size of the volume that they have. In some cases, for some smaller entities, their charge is a lot higher, but in other cases, it's pretty similar. And we get just a little over a 1% rebate.
This, the process for moving employee reimbursements to direct deposits, it says 10. Is that just 10% of the reimbursements now are going to direct deposit, or what's that number mean?
We estimate that as 10% of our process is complete on what
Oh, okay.
get that completed, yes.
So that's not happening yet. It's getting there.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, but any other questions? We've gone through a lot of information. Appreciate. Okay, thank you. And then the last thing we're going to do is spend some time.
Yeah, so any thoughts as far as plus delta of strengths or opportunities from either the product itself or process used, and this would just be with kind of with those presented this evening.
I'm going to say, again, I just think it's just too much information to process and to really absorb and spend the kind of time that I want to as a board member. I mean, we were talking about educational services, secondary and elementary, basically, and finance. I mean, the nuts and bolts of what and I mean, there was just so much. And I don't know, as we move forward, I know we talked about doing these twice a year, right, for each. And I guess my preference would be once a year and spread them out. So, we're looking at information on maybe 3 or 4 departments, then 6 or 7. So go ahead.
I think that some of these the board don't need to deal with. I think education and finance we do. But I think most of these are the superintendent's responsibility, and we don't need to be looking at every detail of whether the buildings are clean or whether unless there's a problem or something exceptional. Our business should be about education and make sure the money's being used correctly. So personally, I think we're micromanaging pieces of that we don't need to.
I would just add that I think both comments kind of, speak to the larger process that maybe is in scope for this summer. Is that fair to say, Dr. Ritter? And so some of that, I think actually they both kind of get to purpose. And so as we refine purpose, we can work towards those.
Well, and then there was also the, are we still obligated by the state to do program reviews?
This counts for that.
And this counts for that. So
what program? What do you define as program?
Well, you have to.
You can define it any way you'd like.
Okay.
According to them.
Oh, now you can?
Yeah, you don't have set programs.
You don't have set programs that you have to evaluate? Okay. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, one of the reasons, and I agree, I think now that we've gone through this entire process, I'd like personally, and when we can certainly talk about this at a retreat, I'd like to pull out, maybe we make an agreement to pull out 6 for the next year and say we want to we want to look at these. But my understanding from this process was that this was helpful for the administration to go through this process because it made you take a much more impactful look at these programs. So even though we may look at 6, I don't think there's any harm in putting as information items as they come about, slapping them on as information items and not talking about them at the board table, but having them available to board members if they want. But again, the process still goes through with the administration. But that was my understanding, is that it was helpful for the administration to go through this process. Now that we've gone through it a year, I agree with Ms. Bush that I don't know that a number of these I need to see next year. I wouldn't mind seeing the information to see where the dashboard kind of stuff is, and if there's follow-up questions, then certainly I'd like to ask those follow-up questions. But I agree we could pick 6 or 8 and the ones that we really want to focus on, and then we could have a much more in-depth discussion.
We will.
Dr. Prater?
Okay.
Are we going to look at this on our retreat in July? I'll save my comments.
Okay.
So then the final piece with ongoing systems review, had a meeting with Mrs. Bush and Mr. Lee regarding some preliminary discussions around the Board of Education's ongoing systems review. Still to come are the Board of Education ongoing system review and the Office of Superintendent. Office of Superintendent will come in June. That'll be alone, kind of by itself. And so we started a kind of down the general path. We tried to work the same process we've worked with others. And we were able to do it somewhat, but then we kind of had other discussions and important discussions and thoughtful comments. And so at that point, I defer to Dr. Ritter or Mr. Lee or Mrs. Bush for thoughts on next steps.
We spent a great 2 hours talking about OSR for the board and where we need to go, and looking at the goals and looking at the mission and the vision of the board. Certainly, I'm not going to speak for Ms. Bush, but I don't think we were in a position to say we think these are the goals that we ought to have, and these are the action items that we need to have, and here's the measures that we ought to have, without full board involvement of what those should be at the retreat. And so we basically said, let's put it to the retreat, start the process, and then move forward from there. Because there was a lot of things we talked about as far as goals that needed to be changed, or needed to be looked at. I won't say changed. But we just felt like, at least, rather than the two of us just putting something together, we'll put something together to bring to the retreat, but we didn't want to say, here's what it is, here's where we're going, and here's the direction we're going with just 2 of us.
And basically we just plugged in what's already there, what your goals already are. We're not, that's where we were really kind of unsure as to how do you measure some of those things. But so we'll have a structure with something to address, but the final product will be a product of the whole board.
Sound agreeable to everyone? Okay.
And if I may, just in closing or commentary with that is actually been this kind of finding of process has been customary with some programs. The difference is a program leader can go back and have a team meeting on a Friday to talk about this, and then they can set a goal for the next week. We have to think longer horizon here. So that does give me faith in the process itself, that it's actually been kind of a natural byproduct of opening discussion, go back and work. Opening discussion, go, kind of an iterative process. So thank you for that.
My own comment would be somewhat, I'll follow up on Mr. Hosmer and Ms. Bush. In the fact, I think we need to narrow it down for what the board sees annually, but I'm not so sure we may want to do something where it's every couple of years or something. At least it's brought to the board as a information item, transportation or whatever, not every year. Maybe it's on a 2-year cycle, whatever. I encourage you guys to, I know you're going to do it anyway, because it's really a good business review internally from a staff standpoint to do this. But I do think it would be important to, every once in a while, the board look at the weeds, and that's all, and have a chance to look at it and not get down in them. Just look to see what's going on. Theirs.
Oh.
The OSRs. I don't have a problem with seeing them every once in a while. It's good to have the information, but I don't need it necessarily every year for every one of them. Some of them do, but some of them, I'd still like to see, when we talk about transportation or something like that, I would like to see that, one, from a budget standpoint.
Well, I was going to say, the issue there goes then, if we want to use it for budgetary reasons, then we're going to have to, and like I said, we can talk about this, but be thinking about things that have really, really resonated for you with this process, things that haven't. I think it will be good to have that kind of input, so.
Let me say, having Matt there to help us understand and work us through has been immeasurably helpful.
Thank you, Mrs. Bush.
And I can tell you just from my short time here, I'm going to miss having Matt around.
Yeah.
A wealth of knowledge.
Matt has support with Joe.
All right, thank you, Dr. Goodman. I think we all owe him a round of applause for his. Okay, moving on to, let's see, we took action on the 7th on the Glendale roof, and we are now in Studi Middle School.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Ritter. It's my pleasure to bring this action item to you this evening. This is for the renovations that will take place at the Studi Middle School for our alternative programs. The project consists of exterior site work, which is dealing with the repairing parking lot, adding a bus lane, repairing drainage issues in the courtyard, and then there's the interior work, and that consists of some remodel for the daycare and the relocation of the clothing bank. And that's all part of making the facility ready for moving the Bailey, Berry, and Pepperdine programs into that facility. We received bids from 3 contractors on this project. The bid tabulation sheet is attached with the lowest responsible bidder in bold and underlined. There are 2 alternates as part of that program. The first alternate was for replacement of paved surfaces versus patching, which was in the base. And then the second alternate was for the realignment of the service road with the overlay. Bates & Associates was the architect for this project. This would be funded both from the 2012-13 major repair and the 2013-14 major repair budgets. And it is the recommendation that the board approves the contract to Bales Construction in the amount of $445,500 for base bid and alternates 1 and 2.
Are there any questions? In Bates & Associates, the architect, where are they located?
Here in Springfield.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Bush and seconded by Dr. Prater that the board approves the contract to Bales Construction in Springfield in the amount of $445,500 for the base bid and alternates 1 and 2. You can keep just going.
Okay.
Yeah, just keep going.
This next action item is for parking lot renovations at multiple sites. The project consists of expanding the existing parking lot at Bowerman, widening the service lane at McBride, repair, seal, and stripe at the Weaver, Wilder, Parkview JFK, and the Craft Administration Center. We received bids from 4 contractors. The bid tab is attached with the lowest responsible bidder highlighted, bold, and underlined. H Design Group here in Springfield was the architect for this project. With approval, this would be funded from the 2013-14 major repair project or budget. The recommendations, there are 6. The first is that the board approves the contract to Blevins Asphalt in the amount of $49,000 for the base bid for Bowerman. The second is the board approves the contract to Blevins Asphalt in the amount of $29,000 for the base bid at McBride. The third recommendation that the board approves the contract to Blevins Asphalt in the amount of $24,000 for the base bid at Wilder. The fourth recommendation is that the board approves the contract to Ball Paving in the amount of $18,485 for the base bid at the Craft Administration Center. The fifth recommendation, that the board approves the contract to Ball Paving in the amount of $40,860 for the base bid at the Parkview JFK. And the last recommendation, that the board approves the contract to Ball Paving in the amount of $3,895 for the base bid at Weaver.
Are there any questions? Mr. Hosmer?
I noticed that on the base bid at McBride, there was only one bid.
Yes.
Is that a concern that you have, that we don't have competitive bids on that?
We obviously like to see more, but it was in line with what we had anticipated. I don't have any information as to why we only received one.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I move for the acceptance of all 6 bids.
Is there a second?
I second.
Been moved by Dr. Prater and seconded by Dr. Frederick that the board approve the 3 bids to Blevin Asphalt and the 3 bids to Ball Paving as outlined in the board documents. Thank you. Mr. Jodas?
Thank you. A request for proposal for real estate broker services was issued on April 17th. Bids were received from 5 local firms. The committee reviewed the bids based on commission structure, experience and qualifications, key personnel and resources. And at this time, we ask that the board approve the bid for broker services from Sperry Van Ness / Rankin Company.
Are there any questions on this? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Renner and seconded by Dr. Prater that the board approve the bid for broker services to Sperry Van Ness and Rankin Company. And then the treasurer's report.
Well, in light of the fact we've already talked
Yeah.
in an earlier meeting about this, I will say that we do have information on the May sales tax and property taxes, and they came in, both of them came in pretty much right at where they were same month last year, so no change there.
Any questions of Mr. Chodas on, excuse me, the treasurer's report? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Lee and seconded by Mrs. Bush that the board approves the treasurer's report as presented.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the routine action items. Is there a motion that the board approve each of the action items as submitted, the routine action items?
So moved.
For second?
Second.
Been moved by Dr. Prater and seconded by Mr. Renner that the board approves the routine action items as submitted.
Oops.
We're going a little fast, aren't we?
Mine clicked on abstain. And clicked yes.
Troublemaker.
It doesn't matter, I guess.
You can change your vote, can't you? Well,
Change vote right up there at the top.
Be like Chicago. Just vote again.
You do.
She changed.
she changed it.
Good.
I was going to say, we're a little punchy tonight. Must be. Moving on to the general consent items, is there a motion that the board approves each recommendation submitted by the administration in the general consent items?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Lee and seconded by Mrs. Bush that the board approves each of the routine action items as submitted. Mrs. Luton, are there any public comments to non-agenda items? Okay. Moving on to comments from the board, a legislative report. And what I'd like to do here is try to tighten up our discussion. I know sometimes I get a little bit on my soapbox when we get to this part, but I think if there are issues that we need to be paying attention to, maybe what got passed, what didn't, that we know that's going to impact us, that would be helpful. So
I don't think there's anything to say.
There is some stuff to say.
I know, but I mean, there wasn't anything to say. Anyway, go ahead.
Mr. Lee, you want to?
At least it's over.
Yeah.
And it was really sort of a no harm. Not a lot of bad things, not a lot of good things, either one. But the one that's still out there is the House Bill 253, which is the tax cut, which is on the governor's desk, which I'm pretty sure he'll veto, but we'll have a veto session in August. There's a lot of activity. We have a consortium going now of all the impacted parties across the state that are coming together because this is not going away. Even if the veto doesn't get overridden, it's coming back.
Yeah.
It may come back as an initiative petition. It will be here next year too. The problem with this one is it's a tax cut with no sales tax to supplement it. It's just a pure cut of some $700 million. The other ones at least had sales tax shift.
Yep.
This one doesn't. So it is.
And that's the one that passed.
That's the one that got to the governor's desk.
But they think it's okay because it doesn't kick in unless there's an increase of at least $100 million into the budget, which isn't enough to cover for the loss.
Yeah, it's still going to be a significant impact to us. The other ones that would impact us that got passed, that one, they did get DESE got the deal where they can intervene for unaccredited districts.
Senate Bill 125.
So that one, that was Senate Bill 125, which originally had all kinds of stuff in it: teacher evaluation, tenure, administrators, and everything like that. That's the good news. The bad news is it's probably likely that there will be an initiative petition to put teacher tenure on the ballot. Rex is gathering resources to potentially put teacher tenure as a constitutional amendment. I don't know how to deal with that yet, but wow, that's the word right now.
Teachers always end up in the Constitution some way, don't they?
Well, it doesn't belong in the Constitution. Regardless of what you think, it shouldn't be in the Constitution.
No.
Another one that we got passed, which was a good one, was we did get the exemption from the Sunshine Law, got passed on the security and safety plans. Last hour of the day, Friday, got passed. So that was the one that we were focusing on really, really heavy to make sure that we would get passed. The other one that kind of, where's my list, scares me a little bit are two gun bills that provide measures for teachers to pack. And if they're designated in, we don't have the situation in Springfield because we have SROs, school resource officers, but most districts, a lot of them don't have it. Well, there's a bill, Senate Bill 75 and 436, House Bill 436, which basically establishes a school can identify staff members as school protection officers who can carry. And got to go through lots of training and all that kind of stuff. Part of the problem is they have to, there's a whole lot of ghosts in the closet with that one from the standpoint of if it's a teacher that has a weapon or it's a school protection officer, they have to have the gun with them at all times. If they don't have the gun with them, then they're subject to termination. Wow. And I understand the goal is you don't want it sitting on your desk, but
Did this pass?
it's at the governor's desk.
It's at, okay.
Yeah, both of these are on the governor's desk. And it's voluntary. This is not mandatory. This just says if you do this, this is what you will do. And so there was a whole lot of gun bills passed this year in the legislature. And so conceal and carry and that kind of stuff. But this was one I just really think is problematic for districts that decide that they want to find somebody in their schools to be a, quote, school protection officer. And
Then anything else, Mr. Lee?
Teacher 10 we talked about, no Medicaid solution, no tax credit solution. There's still a lot of effort on Common Core. They did pass a resolution in the budget that said the state of Missouri can't spend any money on Common Core to implement Common Core.
How could you?
Did they pass it saying
To get rid of
DESE
it?
has to have another series of meetings around the state?
No, that one passed. We did have a series of meetings.
Yeah, but they want another.
No, I don't think that
Because
did.
the ones who are opposed did not get a chance to speak.
I'm not aware that that one got passed. So it was a fun year. It's not going to be a very quiet summer with all the other things going on because of the veto session that comes up this fall. But
Well, I want to thank you and Dr. Ritter for staying on top of all those issues, all the rest of the board who called legislators. They made a difference, I think.
I do appreciate that too. When we've asked you to call them, you've called them.
Have we tried, you probably have, to bring our local folks together and explain to them issues?
We do that every fall.
Do they show up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of them do.
Do they listen?
Yes.
Well,
In terms of, yes, we have teacher evaluation in place, yes, we have accountability.
Yeah, we tell them, and then they get pressure from their party.
Don't confuse them with the facts.
Yeah, don't confuse them with the facts.
Gotcha.
So.
One of the things, just
But we
as,
do
And we
as-
remind them, though. We remind them. And
as a follow-up to that, we are putting
our
together an
legislative
accountability of how all the legislators voted on public education bills. So we will have that.
Good.
So we get a feel if they're supportive of public ed or not.
Okay.
So
that's what
All right,
Mr. Osmo always asks for.
I'm going to move us to future issues. One of the ones I did hear tonight is wanting like an update on where we are in our work with literacy.
Right.
I think that's timely in our
heard that.
community, and I think we all need to have that information and what's working and
Sure.
anything else.
Well, I think tied in with that, and I think Bruce made this point when Dr. Quinn presented on the extended learning. You know, the idea that you have kids identified as needing summer school to catch up on their reading, and 1/3 take advantage of it. And that closely ties into, we've identified them, we've got a program that works, and somehow there's a disconnect of 65% of them choosing not to take that program, and looking at whether there's funding issues that need to be addressed, whether there's logistical issues that need to be addressed. You know, somebody's talking about meeting the kids where they are, you know, and I think meeting families where they are is, as opposed to just saying, here's the option, and you take it or leave it. So I think tied into that would be a discussion of how we go forward on changing those numbers around, whether it's mandatory, whether it's beginning first day of school, letting folks know that that's going to be
Maybe
mandatory.
what our options are. Yeah, what our options are.
Yeah. So
Okay. Probably sometime this summer then.
Oh, yeah. I think we
Dr.
need to do
Ritter?
that, plus follow up with the benchmarking, some targets. And we need to do all that, I think, before school starts, so that everybody has that picture.
Okay.
I got that message.
All right. Anything else, future issues or other?
since we're not meeting again until June 11th, the MSBA Leadership Summit is June 7th and 8th in Tantera. And just for information, Ms. Moore is the keynote opening speaker for the conference. And
She's
getting
cringing
paid.
over
She's
there.
getting paid for that big time.
Oh, I'm
yeah,
sure.
so
There she is.
She's the opening speaker, and Michael Parrish is the closing speaker. So we've bookended it just pretty top notch. And then
The better was the first.
and we have two presentations. Springfield has two presentations during the session, so
Great.
hopefully you'll be able to attend those. Whoever's
I'll be
registered to
there.
go. So should be a good.
And if you're a
2 days.
delegate,
You
if
do
you're a
our list of
delegate,
this.
you'll have
Yeah.
opportunity to
Delegate assembly. Those delegates need you there to vote on some important
recognizing
MSBA issues.
Mr. Lee for his year of service. So
Last round.
great. Okay, you received the financial and operations report under separate cover. Please do your plus deltas so we can improve our work together. And we do need to go into executive session. So is there a motion? And we need to go in for basically everything we can. Real estate, collective bargaining, personnel, and to hear testimony from a student discipline hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Been moved by Dr. Prater, seconded by Dr. Frederick, that the board meets in executive session to discuss real estate, collective bargaining, personnel matters, and to hear testimony in a student hearing. Just a minute. my vote just came up. Oh, right here. From a student discipline hearing as provided in section 610.021, 2, 3, 6, 9, and 13 RSMO.
Excellent.
And if you vote no, that's
Kathy, mine,
you got to go out of the.
well, I've been going out of it, but
You don't have to do it, but